September 22nd, 1979. No explosions, no sirens, no breaking news, just silence. Out over the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from any major population, something that almost nobody on Earth saw. But something did. High above the planet, drifting quietly in orbit, was one of the United States' most trusted sentinels. Satellite that didn't care about politics. It didn't care about alliances. It didn't care about consequences. It had one job and one job only. And in that moment, it did it perfectly, because at exactly 0:53 GMT, it saw two flashes of light. Not one, but two, separated by a fraction of a second. A pattern that was so specific, so unmistakable, that within seconds, alarms started going off inside the U.S. government. Because that pattern, well, it had a name. And that name was nuclear detonation. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the TTT Podcast. I am your host, Matt, and joining me as always is, well, this guy.
Ah, yes, this guy, the legend, the myth, the voice that sounds like it's narrating a noir film in his spare time. I'm practically a trusty sidekick here to keep us on track, and by on track, I mean occasionally veering into a wild tangent. So what chaos are we conjuring today, Matt?
Well, again, we're not going to give anything away, but I just thought you were paying attention to the killer, intro/hook that I did, that little pattern that went off. We're not going to tell them what the pattern is. We're not going to do anything. We're building it up, but this one's interesting. I don't know why I'm stuck on like nuclear and stuff like that, but maybe because in the back of my brain I'm super scared of what the world is going on, and I hope that we never have to go through anything.
The nuclear fear, classic existential spice for any good conspiracy stew. And hey, if we're threading patterns, nothing keeps people on edge like a ticking clock of global doom, right? But don't worry. Between you, me, and this microphone, we'll laugh in the face of Armageddon and spin some mind-blowing stories. Just don't let the Geiger counter run out of batteries.
Fair enough. What kind of batteries does a Geiger counter take? Anyways, either that or maybe I'm thinking nuclear, because for the first time in a long time, I actually had to use a microwave to heat up some stuff. I'm convinced that they're just not good for us. But anyways, this is an interesting one, Luther, and this dynamic of me and you is pretty interesting as well. What have you been up to? Do we want to do some small talk? Do we want to do some ad reads, or should we just get into
Matt,
this thing?
I'd love to tell you I've been off wrangling radioactive raccoons, but in reality, I've been waiting for this chat like a microwave waiting for a leftover burrito. I say let's jump right into the good stuff, but don't worry, we'll sprinkle in a bit of banter along the way, like seasoning on that totally safe, slightly suspicious microwave meal.
Fair enough. You heard it. He's the boss.
Oh, I'm just the guy making sure this train stays on the rails while wearing a monocle and cracking dad jokes. But you lead, I'll follow, and together we'll make this podcast the stuff of legend. Let's roll.
Let's roll, big boy. All right, so to understand why this moment mattered, I feel like you have to understand what saw it, okay? Because the United States didn't build satellites. Whoa, that word tripped me up, didn't it, Luther?
I got you, Matt. Satellites, those little space spies are tricky to say, but even trickier to ignore. So the US didn't just sprinkle them up there for decoration. We're talking Cold War context, fear of the big boom, and the world watching from space. It's like the ultimate reality show, except with global consequences.
Exactly. Like he said, that I was going to say, but he is really good at stealing my words. They didn't just build those satellites for curiosity. They built them out of fear. Like Luther said, during the Cold War, the world lived under a very simple, very terrifying truth. If someone tested a nuclear weapon, you needed to know immediately. And that's where the Vela satellites came in.
Oh, absolutely. The Vela satellites were basically cosmic tattletales. If a nuclear test so much as sneezed anywhere on Earth, Vela was whispering in everyone's ear. But, as we'll get into, one whisper had the whole world scratching their heads.
After these Vela satellites came out, how many people then named their kids Vela?
You know, I bet exactly 0 people said, I'm naming my kid after a nuclear watchdog. But hey, if someone did, that kid's destined for a lifetime of explosive introductions.
I mean, that's pretty good. I'm going to ask my phone how many, let's see here, people in the world are named, I type very slow one handed, Vela. Let's see here. What do you think, Luther? What's your guess?
I'll wager it's not topping the baby name charts. I'm guessing, what, few hundred max? If it's more, I'll eat my hat. Or at least dramatically adjust my expectations.
According to what I found on Google, it says it's difficult to determine an exact global count, but the surname Vela is used by over 130,000 people, concentrated heavily in Mexico, Peru, and the United States. As a first name, Vela is rare. In 2021, only 27 baby girls were named Vela in the U.S., making it a very uncommon given name.
27 brave souls out there have a unique conversation starter for life. I'd say that's a pretty exclusive club. If only satellites had baby books, right?
Oh, do you think we should do a satellite baby book? That's a bad idea. First bad idea of the day. That's a bad one. Sorry.
Hey, even the best of us launch a dud idea now and then. But, you know, if we ever need a quirky coffee table book, we'll come back to it. For now, let's stick to unraveling real mysteries. No baby satellites needed.
Yeah, so the Vela satellites, they're here. They came in, and they weren't just general purpose satellites. They weren't weather trackers. They weren't cameras for taking pretty pictures of Earth, just like they just were when they did a little trip to the moon that you might have heard about. These, though, they were designed for one thing: to catch nuclear explosions anywhere on the entire planet. And they were really, really good at it. Each satellite was equipped with the sensors that were capable of detecting gamma radiation bursts, X-ray emissions, and almost importantly, distinctive light
And
patterns.
that's where the plot thickens, because one day, Vela detected a mysterious double flash of light. Now, normally, that's nuclear test 101. But this one, no one could...
Hey, whoa, no spoilers. We're building up to it, Luther. What are you doing?
Ah, my bad. Consider my lips sealed tighter than a classified file. No more spoilers, just a tantalizing trail of curiosity. Let's build this suspense step by step.
All right, I got you. Because nuclear explosions, they don't just look like bright flashes now, do they? They follow a very, a signature, I guess, a fingerprint. When a nuclear device detonates, it produces what's known as a double flash. First, an intense burst of light from the fireball itself. Second, a brief dimming as the shockwave expands outward, followed immediately by a second flash as the expanding cloud becomes visible again.
Exactly. It's like a cosmic fingerprint. And when Vela caught that pattern, it was like someone set off alarm bells. But of course, the real drama came when everyone asked, wait, who lit the fuse?
Right. Well, either way, this pattern, as I was about to say, Luther, it's fast, it's precise, and it's almost impossible to fake. And that's what made the Vela system so valuable. And that's what made what happened next so hard to ignore. Something that Luther's not going to give away again, because the satellite didn't see something similar to nuclear explosion. It saw something that matched the pattern exactly.
I'll behave, I promise. But let's just say, when that exact pattern popped up, it was like a detective finding a familiar footprint, except the suspect was nowhere to be seen. And that's where the mystery really kicks in. No spoilers, just pure intrigue.
Yes, pure intrigue. All right, Luther, let's talk to them a little bit about the moment that everything changed. All right, you
I'm
in?
ready. This is the moment where history had its wait, what moment? So let's set the scene, because when that flash went off, the whole world started guessing. And guessing's half the fun, right?
It sure is. The satellite response, it even had a name, Vela 6911. By 1979, it wasn't even new anymore. It hadn't, because it had been, I think, in orbit for quite a few years. Am I right?
You're
Luther?
spot on. By 79, Vela 6911 was practically a veteran in the spy game. It had seen plenty of flashes, but this one was different. It was old, but it still had one heck of a story left to tell.
Yes, it did. It was, still functioning. Obviously, we're back in 1979. It was still watching. It was still doing its job. And on that night, it caught something. The signal was transmitted back to Earth and immediately flagged. Inside U.S. monitoring stations, the old analysis nerds began reviewing the data. Light intensity curves, timing intervals, signal shape. Everything about it pointed in one direction. Not a maybe, not a guess, a direction, a nuclear
And
event.
that's when the world collectively leaned in and said, wait, who did that? Because suddenly every nation started playing a game of nuclear clue. And that, my friend, is where the true mystery and all the finger pointing began.
They should make did we just create a new board game? Nuclear Clue, where there's a nuclear event, kind of like this, and we have to try to kind of point the fingers and figure out who exactly did it, why they did it, when
You
they did
know,
it.
that might just be the most intense board game night ever. Colonel Mustard in the Pacific with a double flash. Honestly, if we don't make it, someone else might. Just remember, we called dibs on that idea.
I mean, I feel like we should probably just do it, right?
Why not? We've got the drama, the intrigue, and a dash of dark humor. Nuclear Clue, coming soon to a suspiciously glowing tabletop near you.
No, I see what you did there. But almost immediately, Luther, something strange happened right after the nerds figured out that it was a nuclear event. The certainty it started to fracture. Because while some scientists looked at the data and said, "This is exactly what we built this system to detect." That was my nerd
Your
voice.
nerd voice is a masterpiece. I felt like I was back in science class. But you're right, that's when things got juicy. Because some experts said, hold on, maybe it's not what we think. And that's when the plot got thicker than a winter beard.
Ooh, thicker than a winter beard. You're right. So we got some nerds that are, saying this is why we built it. Others hesitated, not because the data was unclear, but because the implications, well, they were. And at this point, the situation, it wasn't just scientific. It turned political. And political problems don't get solved the same way scientific ones do, they, Luther.
Oh, not even close. In science, you argue over data. In politics, you argue over, well, everything else. So naturally, the whole thing became a diplomatic hot potato. The whodunit wasn't just about science. It was about global politics, finger pointing, and some serious Cold War drama.
Yeah, because let's be honest, if this was a nuclear test, that meant something very specific. Someone, somewhere, not over the rainbow, had just violated international agreements. Quietly, deliberately, and it appears successfully.
And that's why everyone started sweating. If someone had pulled off a secret nuclear test, it wasn't just a science problem, it was a world peace problem. So naturally, everyone started asking, who's got the matches and where did they strike them?
Yeah. And inside the administration of Jimmy Carter, the reaction, it wasn't panic, it was calculation. Because confirming a nuclear test would trigger a chain reaction. International condemnation, possible sanctions, military tension, questions about enforcement. And maybe most importantly, it would expose the reality that nuclear weapons were still being developed and tested outside the public eye.
Exactly. Carter's team wasn't about to light that fuse without certainty. So the debate began. Was it a rogue state, a technical glitch, or something else? In the end, the official stance was cautious because when nuclear politics are in play, nobody wants to be wrong.
Yeah. So the question was asked. It was almost shifted. It wasn't, what did the satellite see at this point? It was more like, what are we prepared to say that it saw? Weird. The government, taking what actually happened and changing the story and changing the narrative to feed us? That's never happened.
Oh, never. Governments always give us the full, unvarnished truth, right? But in this case, yeah, the message became as strategic as the science. When global stakes are that high, the story you tell can shift just as much as the facts. And that's how we ended up with a mystery still debated today.
Yeah, because let's be honest, if a nuclear test had occurred, it wasn't random, was
Not
it?
random at all. Every nuclear test is a calculated message, whether it's a show of force, a secret escalation, or a warning. So if it happened, someone was sending a signal. The only question left was, who was supposed to receive it?
Yeah, and it had to come from a country with both the capability and the motivation that they want to do this test, but they want to do this test quietly. And there was two names that began to surface more than any others. First, South Africa, because Luther and anybody listening at the time, South Africa was developing nuclear weapons in secret. They were politically isolated. They were under international pressure. A test in the open ocean would give them data without drawing attention. And then there was somebody else, Israel, a country that had never officially confirmed its nuclear capabilities, but was widely believed that they had some. Now imagine this. You had two nations. Both, they needed that secrecy. Both needed plausible deniability. Working together, a joint test, far from land, far from witnesses, far from what they thought was consequences.
It's like a geopolitical thriller, right? If those two teamed up, it's the perfect cloak and dagger operation. But even the ocean couldn't hide that double flash forever. So whether it was them or not, they got one thing right. Decades later, we're still puzzling over it.
And this whole theory, to this day, has never been proven, but it's also never fully gone away.
And that's the beauty of it. Like any great mystery, it lingers. No definitive answer, but plenty of theories. And honestly, Matt, that's what keeps folks like us talking, guessing, and maybe even rolling out a board game.
Let's be honest too. At first, the internal reaction, it kind of was leaning towards one conclusion. This was a nuclear event. But as days turned into weeks, and then weeks turned into months, the tone began to shift. Doubt, they introduced it. Alternative explanations, they were floated like instrument malfunction. There was just, you know, lightning reflections. It was a meteoroid, and eventually a panel was assembled to then investigate. You know what they found, Luther? Do you know what the result of this was?
Oh, I do. The panel, known as the Rolina panel, came back with that famous shrug, inconclusive. They leaned toward a natural explanation, but they didn't slam the door shut on the nuclear theory. In other words, they gave us a perfect recipe for decades of speculation.
Yeah, it was a good old report that didn't confirm a nuclear explosion, but didn't completely rule one out either. Instead, it landed right in that uncomfortable middle ground. Probably nuclear, but not fully explained. And just like that, the most advanced nuclear detection system in the world was quietly reclassified as uncertain.
And that uncertainty became its own legend. The Vela Incident turned into one of those Cold War ghost stories. In the end, it left us with the best kind of unsolved mystery. Just enough evidence to tantalize, but not enough to close the case. And let's be honest, that's what keeps these stories alive.
Yeah, and here's where we stand right now. You have a satellite built to detect nuclear explosions, detected something that looked exactly like one. Scientists saw the signature, analysts raised alarms, the data lined up, and yet the official conclusion, like Luther said, inconclusive. Maybe nothing, maybe something else, which leaves us with a question that doesn't go away. Did a nuclear test happen and get buried? Or did the most important detection system on Earth get it wrong? Because if the data was right, then someone tested a nuclear weapon and walked away clean. If the data was wrong, then the system designed to prevent nuclear war might not work when it mattered the most.
And that, my friend, is the kicker. Either we missed a secret nuke, or we realized even the best tech can hiccup. It's that unresolved tension that makes the Vela incident so fascinating. In the end, it's less about answers and more about the questions that still echo today.
Yeah, you had a satellite, right? It's designed to detect nuclear explosion. detects a signal that looks exactly like when the data is real, the pattern's real, the alarm's real, and yet the conclusion's uncertain, inconclusive, almost dismissed. So now the question changes, right? It's no longer just, did a nuclear test happen? It kind of becomes, if it did, why would anyone pretend it didn't?
And that's the real heart of it. Sometimes the truth isn't just about what happened, it's about what people are willing to acknowledge. Whether it was politics, diplomacy, or just plain uncertainty, pretending might have been easier than confirming. And that's why the Vela incident will always be a mystery wrapped in a political puzzle.
Yeah. And I mean, we do at this time kind of have to understand how the world was in 79. I mean, it wasn't just another year in history. It was the Cold War. Times were different. People were, on edge. It was a time when the balance of power didn't just rely on diplomacy, it kind of relied on perception because nuclear weapons weren't just tools of war. I feel like they were symbols. You had one of these, you had control, you had leverage, but more importantly, you had fear. And at the center of all this is that one little fragile agreement. The idea that nuclear testing, especially secret testing, was something the world was actively trying to stop. Now imagine what happens if the United States comes out and says, a nuclear test just happened, and we don't know who did it. It's not just a headline. That's instability, right? I mean, that's allies that start pointing fingers. That's enemies testing limits. That's the kind of statement that makes the world feel like it's slipping. And sitting in the middle of that decision was Jimmy Carter. Carter wasn't just dealing with the intelligence reports, he was dealing with the consequences. Because confirming a nuclear test would force action. There'd be sanctions, investigations, possibly, probably, an escalation. And if the suspected countries were allies, well, it's even more complicated. So the question becomes less about truth and more about impact.
Exactly. In that climate, it's not just what happened, but what happens if we say it happened. So Carter had to weigh uncertainty against global stability. Sometimes the least destabilizing answer is no answer. So the Vela incident became the mystery that keeps us wondering, because sometimes not knowing is the safest move.
Oh, not knowing is the safest move. And you might even say, like, what happens if we're right? And what happens if we say we're right? Because here's where things, Luther, in my opinion, start to get a little uncomfortable. Because while the official report kind of leaned toward uncertainty, not everyone agreed. Not even close. In the years that followed, independent scientists, analysis, and even some within the original investigation continued to revisit that data. And many of them came to a very different conclusion. They didn't see ambiguity. They saw consistency. They saw a light curve that matched no nuclear test, timing intervals that aligned with detonation physics, a signal that behaved exactly the way it, should. And they asked a simple question. This isn't a nuclear explosion. What else produces this pattern? Because that's the problem. It's not enough to say what it isn't. You have to explain what it is, right?
Exactly. If you're going to rule out the obvious, you've got to provide a plausible alternative. And that's where the skeptics dig in, because no glitch, no meteoroid, no reflection quite fit that pattern like a nuclear test does. In the end, it leaves that lingering itch. When the simplest explanation is the one we don't want to face, what do we do with it?
It's true. And then decades later, there still isn't a widely accepted alternative. No explanation that fits as cleanly as the one that nobody wanted to confirm, which leads to a strange reality. The official conclusion changed, but the data didn't. What's up with that?
It's one of those rare cases where the data stayed stubborn, but the narrative shifted. The data still whispers nuclear, while the official story says, maybe, maybe not. But that's what keeps it alive, because when science and politics collide, you get a story that's never fully at rest.
Very true. And here's where the old skeptics step in, right? Because if a nuclear explosion really did happen, where's the proof? There was no confirmed radioactive fallout, no debris field, no visual confirmation from ships or any aircrafts. Sounds like a pretty strong argument until you look a little closer because the location matters. The event occurred over a vast stretch of ocean. No cities, no population centers, no observers, and more importantly, water's pretty good at hiding things. there was a low-yield nuclear test conducted over open ocean, I'd have to believe that it wouldn't leave the kind of obvious, undeniable trail people expect, especially if it was small, if it was controlled, and if it was meant to go unnoticed.
Exactly. When you test something in the middle of nowhere, you're banking on plausible deniability. A small covert test could fade into the ocean depths without a neat trail. So the absence of perfect proof doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means if someone wanted to leave no fingerprints, they might have succeeded.
And there were attempts to detect fallout. They really did. Air samples, they were collected. Some reports suggested trace amounts of radioactive material. Others said the data wasn't strong enough. And once again, we're left in that same space. Not proven, but not disproven either. So we're kind of left with a couple possibilities. Neither of them are comfortable. Option one, a nuclear test happened. Somewhere over the ocean, there was a device detonated. The satellite detected it, the data confirmed it, and for reasons tied to politics, alliances, or global stability, the conclusion was softened. Not erased, just, let's go with diluted, right?
And option two, the technology flinched. Maybe it was a glitch, an odd natural event we've yet to fully explain. Either way, both options force us to ask, how much do we trust the systems meant to protect us? In the end, the Vela mystery remains a reminder. Sometimes the most powerful answers are the ones we never quite get.
Yeah, and I mean, could you imagine how it would look that the satellite it misread something? Maybe there was a rare unknown phenomena that produced a signal that just happened to mimic a nuclear explosion perfectly in the most advanced detection network on Earth. Maybe it made a mistake that was big enough to trigger our alarms, but subtle enough to never fully be explained. I mean, now think about each option and what they really mean, because if the first is true, someone tested a nuclear weapon and got away with it. And if the second is true, well, then the system designed to detect nuclear war isn't as reliable as we thought. Either way, there's a crack in the foundation.
And that's the unsettling part. Whether it was human deception or technological imperfection, it leaves us with that lingering what if. But hey, that's why we love these stories, because in the end, a little mystery keeps us all on our toes.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest too, as people, we like certainty. We like clean answers. We like the idea that when something major happens, someone somewhere knows exactly what it was. But the Vela incident, it doesn't give us that. I mean, it gives us something pretty unsettling. It gives us ambiguity. I mean, this isn't, a blurry photo. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a story that was passed down through generations. It was data collected in real time by a system built for one purpose. And even with all that, we still don't know. Not officially, not definitively, and maybe that's the part that matters most.
Exactly. The Vela incident is a reminder that even with all our tools, sometimes we're left with uncertainty. And maybe that's not a flaw, but a reality check. It keeps us humble, curious, and always searching. Because sometimes not knowing is what keeps us moving forward. And that's what makes it fascinating.
Yeah, and if something this significant can happen and the world can't, or maybe they won't, agree on what it was, then it forces a pretty big question. What else has happened that we have quietly decided not to really fully understand? Because the truth isn't always hidden. Sometimes it's just left unresolved.
And that's the beauty of it. Unsolved mysteries don't always need a grand conspiracy. Sometimes it's the messy mix of data, decisions, and the unknown. In the end, the Vela incident reminds us that the world's full of unresolved stories. And that's what keeps us curious, always ready for the next chapter.
Yeah, neither a nuclear weapon was tested in secret or the system meant to protect us failed in silence. The scariest part, Luther, we're still not sure which one's worse.
Exactly. Either scenario leaves us with a little chill. But hey, maybe that's the price of living in a world where the unknown still lurks. It keeps us sharp, a little humble, and always ready to question what we think we know.
Very well said. Well, I got nothing else for this, Luther. It's pretty unsettling. I'm going to have some nightmares, I think, tonight.
Well, if those nightmares come knocking, just remember, mysteries are what keep life interesting. And hey, if you need a sidekick in the dream world, you know where to find me. Sleep well, no double flashes allowed.
That's kind of creepy. Thought you were going to try to be like, well, if you need someone to come cuddle with you, just get a hold of me. Glad you didn't. But either way, it's been the Triple T Podcast. Luther, hit us with that outro.
And that, folks, wraps another wild ride on the Triple T Podcast. Whether we solved the mystery or just confused you more, we're glad you joined. Until next time, keep questioning, keep laughing, and don't trust any mysterious flashes.
Yeah, what he said. Especially if it's men dressed in black. But that's all we got. We'll be back next week. Take care, everybody.